Jack Carter had been a detective for over 10 years, but something about the call he received that evening felt different. The small town of Ashford was usually quiet, peaceful even. But tonight, something was off. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door of his modest office, his mind already running through the possibilities. It wasn't often that the police needed his expertise, but when they did, it usually meant things were far from ordinary. The scene was just outside the local antique shop. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars illuminated the cold street, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. As Jack stepped out of his car, he was met by Officer Daniels, who quickly briefed him on the situation. "We found her about an hour ago," Daniels said, his voice shaky. "Her name's Emily Fisher. She worked here at the shop. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. We don't know much yet, but something doesn't feel right." Jack nodded, scanning the area. The shop windows were dark, the door locked tight. The only sign of disturbance was a single footprint leading toward the back alley. The rest of the scene seemed almost too quiet. Inside the shop, the air was thick with tension. Emily lay lifeless, her pale face illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp. The room was cluttered with old books, paintings, and trinkets. Jack carefully examined the surroundings. Nothing appeared out of place, but there was an undeniable sense of something hidden beneath the surface. He knelt beside the body, observing the subtle details. The faint scent of lavender, the delicate bruise on Emily's neck, and the way her hand was curled, as if she had been reaching for something. But what? "Do you know if she had any enemies?" Jack asked, his eyes still on the body. Officer Daniels hesitated before answering. "We're not sure. She was well liked in the community. Quiet, kept to herself mostly. But there was a rumor. Some people thought she was involved in something, but no one knew for sure." Jack stood up and turned toward the officer. "Keep me updated. I'll start questioning the people around here." As he left the shop, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much darker story. And in his gut, he knew the answers weren't going to come easily. The next morning, Jack returned to the scene, determined to dig deeper. The shop was now closed, but the investigation was in full swing. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. Jack took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what he would find next. Inside the shop, he noticed something new. A small, leather-bound book lay on the floor, half hidden under the desk. It didn't belong there. Jack bent down and picked it up, its cover worn with age. The title, barely readable, read "The Secrets of Ashford." As he flipped through the pages, Jack noticed something odd. The book was filled with handwritten notes in the margins, some of which were underlined or circled. The writing looked familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. He decided to take it with him for further inspection. "Officer Daniels," Jack called as he stepped outside. "I need you to run a background check on this book. See if it's connected to anything unusual." Daniels nodded, taking the book from him. "Got it, detective." Later that afternoon, Jack sat in his office, staring at the book. His curiosity was growing. The notes were written in a cryptic way, and they seemed to reference places in Ashford, somewhere he'd never heard of before. Was this a clue? Or just the ramblings of someone who was obsessed with local history? Just then, his phone rang. It was Officer Daniels. "Detective, you need to see this," Daniels said. "The book's connected to a family here in Ashford. The Fisher family. Emily's parents have a history with it. But there's something strange. They've been missing for years. No one knows what happened to them." Jack's mind raced. Emily's parents, missing. This was bigger than he had expected. "I'll be right there," Jack replied, already heading out the door. This new information made the case even more complicated, but it also gave him a lead. The Fisher family's past might hold the key to understanding Emily's death. Jack drove to the Fisher family's old home, a large, crumbling mansion on the outskirts of Ashford. The property was overgrown with weeds, the paint on the walls peeling. It was clear that the house had been abandoned for years, but there was something unsettling about the place, like it still held secrets, even in its silence. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He tried the handle, and to his surprise, it creaked open. The smell of dust and decay filled the air as Jack stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The house was eerily still, as though no one had lived there for decades. Jack took a deep breath and moved cautiously through the rooms, taking in the faded portraits of the Fisher family that lined the walls. In the living room, he found a stack of old letters tied with string, resting on a table near the fireplace. As he untied the bundle, a few pages fell out, each one filled with the same elegant handwriting. They were letters written by Emily's mother letters to someone named Robert. Jack's eyes narrowed as he read through the pages. The letters described a strained relationship between Emily's parents, with mentions of a business venture gone wrong, accusations of betrayal, and hints of a dark secret. One letter, dated just a few months before their disappearance, mentioned a meeting with someone who could ruin everything if they weren't careful. It was clear now that the Fisher family was hiding something, and Emily's death might be linked to it. But the question remained: who was Robert, and what had he done to drive Emily's parents into hiding? Just as Jack was about to leave the room, he heard a creak behind him. He spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. The house was as empty as before, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Jack returned to his office late that afternoon, the weight of the new discoveries pressing on his mind. The Fisher family's history was more complicated than he had imagined. The letters had revealed more than he had hoped for, but they also opened up new questions. Who was Robert? And what was the secret that had driven Emily's parents into hiding? He sat at his desk, flipping through the book The Secrets of Ashford once more, hoping to find a link between the notes in the margins and the Fisher family. As he scanned the pages, one phrase stood out: "The key to the fortune lies within the shadows." Jack leaned forward, his fingers tracing the words. Fortune? Shadows? What did that mean? He had already learned that Emily's parents had been involved in some sort of business deal gone wrong, but this reference to a fortune felt too significant to ignore. He decided to investigate further. That night, he drove to the local library where he hoped to find more clues. The old building was nearly empty, the faint smell of aged paper in the air. Jack approached the librarian, Mrs. Harrison, and asked her about the Fisher family's past. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "The Fishers were never quite the same after the accident," she said quietly, lowering her voice. "The town has always whispered about a lost fortune, something connected to their family's history. But no one really knows what happened. Until now, I suppose." Mrs. Harrison led Jack to a dusty archive in the back of the library, where old town records were kept. There, hidden among yellowing files, Jack discovered a folder labeled Fisher Estate. Inside, there were pages of legal documents, old maps of the town, and a list of names, some of which were crossed out. One name stood out: Robert Harrison. It was the same name from the letters. But what did his connection to the Fisher family mean? Jack couldn't be sure yet, but he was beginning to suspect that Robert wasn't just a business partner. He was part of something far darker. The next morning, Jack set out to find Robert Harrison. He had no idea what he would uncover, but after everything he'd learned, he knew the man was connected to the heart of the mystery. With his mind racing, Jack drove to Harrison's estate, a large, isolated property on the edge of town. The house was imposing, with dark windows and an eerie stillness that seemed to surround it. Jack parked his car at the end of the long driveway and approached the front door. His footsteps were the only sound as he walked up the stone path, feeling a growing sense of unease. As he knocked, the door creaked open slightly, revealing an older man with graying hair and a hardened expression. "And Detective Jack Carter," Jack said, showing his badge. "I need to ask you a few questions about your connection to the Fisher family." Robert's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "The Fishers? I haven't heard that name in years." "What do you want with me?" "I believe you may know more about their disappearance than you're letting on," Jack replied, his voice calm but firm. "Emily Fisher is dead, and I have reason to believe you were involved in some way." For a moment, Robert stood frozen, his gaze shifting from Jack to the distant horizon. Then, without warning, he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice tinged with reluctance. The interior of the house was as cold and imposing as the exterior. The walls were lined with expensive paintings and antique furniture, all in pristine condition. Robert led Jack to a study at the back of the house, where a fire crackled in the hearth. "I don't know why you're wasting your time," Robert began, his voice thick with disdain. "I haven't seen Emily or her parents in years. They were fools, chasing after some worthless treasure. They got what they deserved." Jack's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What treasure?" Robert paused, his eyes narrowing. "You really think this is about a woman's death? This is about a family that got greedy. They wanted what didn't belong to them. They came looking for something they couldn't have, and they paid the price." Jack's mind raced. The mention of greed, treasure, and the Fishers' hidden past all pointed to one thing. Emily's death wasn't just a random act. It was a consequence of something much bigger. But what had Robert done, and how was he involved? Before Jack could ask another question, Robert stood up abruptly. "I've said enough. If you want to keep digging, be my guest. But be warned, some things are better left buried." The confrontation with Robert Harrison had left Jack with more questions than answers. The man's cryptic words haunted him, but Jack couldn't let the case go. There was something in Robert's tone, something hidden in the way he spoke, that made Jack suspect the old man was lying. Emily's death wasn't just a result of greed or a family dispute. There was more to it, and Jack was determined to find out what. That night, Jack sat alone in his office, sifting through the evidence. He pulled out the book, The Secrets of Ashford, once again, the words written in the margins now taking on new meaning. The phrase, "The key to the fortune lies within the shadows," seemed more like a clue than a warning. But what did it mean? Shadows, was it a metaphor, or was it something more literal? Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on his door. He looked up to find Officer Daniels standing in the doorway, holding an envelope. "Detective, I've got something for you," Daniels said, his face serious. "It's from an anonymous source." Jack opened the envelope, revealing a single sheet of paper. The message was short and simple. "The truth lies in Emily's journal. Find the hidden compartment." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Emily's journal. He'd read the letters from her mother, but he hadn't thought about Emily's own writings. The journal might hold the final piece of the puzzle. He quickly grabbed his coat and headed for the Fisher family's old house, hoping that this time he would uncover the truth. Upon arriving at the house, Jack wasted no time. He retraced his steps from his earlier visit, going back to the room where he had found the letters. His hands moved quickly over the walls, checking for hidden compartments or secret drawers. After what seemed like an eternity, his fingers brushed against a small, almost imperceptible indentation in the wall behind the fireplace. With a quiet click, A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small leather-bound journal. Jack's heart raced as he opened it, flipping through the pages. Emily's handwriting was neat and precise, but the entries were filled with anxiety, as if she had been trying to make sense of something that had haunted her. The last entry read, "I'm scared. I know too much now. Robert Harrison isn't who he seems. He's after the treasure, and he won't stop until he finds it." Jack's mind raced. Robert wasn't just hiding something. He was actively hunting for whatever Emily had uncovered. And now, Jack realized, he was in the crossfire. With Emily's journal in hand, Jack knew he was close to uncovering the full extent of the mystery. Robert Harrison had been hiding something, and now, Jack had the final piece of the puzzle. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that confronting Robert directly could be dangerous. Emily had been killed because she had uncovered too much. Would Jack be next? The only way to find out the truth was to confront Robert one last time. Jack spent the next few hours preparing, reviewing the journal entries, and mapping out his plan. Emily's fear had been clear in her writing. Robert was not just after the treasure. He was willing to do anything to keep it hidden. Jack couldn't let him get away with it. As evening fell, Jack made his way to Robert's mansion. The estate was quieter than usual, and the air was thick with tension. Jack parked at the end of the long driveway and walked up to the front door. His mind focused on the task at hand. He was ready for whatever Robert had planned. When the door opened, Robert's expression was unreadable. "Back again?" he asked, his voice low. "What do you want now, detective?" "I know what you've been hiding, Robert," Jack said, stepping inside. "I know about the treasure, and I know you were involved in Emily's death." Robert's face twisted with anger. "You're making a huge mistake, Carter. This is none of your business." "It is now," Jack replied firmly. "You killed Emily to keep your secret, but you won't get away with it." Robert stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think you're going to stop me? You're just like her, too curious for your own good." Jack didn't flinch. "I don't care about the treasure, Robert. But I will make sure you don't hurt anyone else." The two men stood facing each other in the dimly lit hallway, the tension thick between them. Jack knew this was it, the moment that would decide everything. Robert had crossed a line, and now Jack was ready to end it. Before Robert could say anything else, Jack lunged, knocking the older man back against the wall. The struggle was brief but intense, and with one final push, Robert fell to the ground, unconscious. Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He had won, but the mystery wasn't over. There was still the matter of the treasure, the thing that had driven Robert to kill Emily, to lie and to protect his secret at all costs. As he stood over Robert, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to discover. The treasure might have been hidden, but the real question remained. What had Emily uncovered, and where was it? With Robert Harrison incapacitated and on his way to the local police station, Jack felt a strange sense of relief. The man who had caused so much pain and confusion was finally in custody. But something still gnawed at Jack's thoughts. The treasure. The thing that had driven Robert to such extremes. Emily had discovered it. And now it was only a matter of time before Jack would uncover its true nature. The next morning, Jack returned to the Fisher family's estate. He had already taken Robert's confession into account, but there was still one last piece of the puzzle to solve. The treasure. Emily had been close to finding it, and Jack believed she had left a final clue in her journal. Jack went straight to the hidden compartment where he had found Emily's journal the night before. He combed through the pages once again, searching for anything that might hint at where the treasure could be located. As he read, his eyes caught a final entry, one that had been scribbled hastily, as if written in a moment of panic. "I found it. The treasure is buried beneath the old oak tree in the center of town. But I can't tell anyone. Robert knows what I've discovered, and he will stop at nothing to keep it hidden." Jack's heart raced. The old oak tree in the center of Ashford. He had passed by it countless times but never thought much of it. Now, it was clear that the tree was the key to solving everything. He immediately set off for the center of town. The old oak tree was as ancient as Ashford itself, its roots sprawling across the ground like a web of secrets. Jack stood before it, staring at the massive trunk. There had to be something hidden beneath it. Jack knelt down and began to dig. The earth was soft, and within minutes, his shovel hit something solid. He cleared the dirt away and uncovered a wooden chest, weathered and worn, but still intact. His heart pounded as he lifted the lid. Inside, there were stacks of old papers, photographs, and a small, ornate box. Jack carefully examined the contents. The photographs revealed more about the Fisher family's past, about their connection to Robert and their pursuit of wealth. But it was the box that caught his attention. Inside, there was a small key, and attached to it was a note. It read, "This is the key to everything. Find the vault, and you will understand." Jack's mind raced. A vault? What vault? And what was in it that was worth so much to Robert? As he stood there, staring at the key, Jack realized that the story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Jack could hardly believe the turn the case had taken. What had started as a routine investigation into Emily Fisher's death had now become a treasure hunt, with twists and turns that led to a hidden vault, a mysterious key, and a question that weighed heavily on his mind. What was so important that it had driven Robert to kill? He didn't waste any time. The small, ornate key Emily had left in the chest felt heavy in his palm as he drove back to Ashford, his thoughts racing. The town had changed in the years since he had first arrived, but he had learned enough to know that its secrets ran deeper than anyone realized. There was a vault hidden somewhere, and if he could find it, he would finally have the answers he sought. When he arrived at the old town hall, Jack immediately went to the records room. The vault had to be in a building that had stood for generations, and town hall seemed the most likely place. He checked the records and found that there had been a vault beneath the building, a place where important documents and valuable items had been kept in the past. Jack's heart began to race as he made his way to the basement. The old stone stairs creaked under his weight as he descended into the darkness. At the bottom, he found a heavy wooden door, locked and covered in layers of dust. It was exactly the kind of place a treasure would be hidden, forgotten by time, but still standing strong. He inserted the key into the lock, and after a moment of resistance, it turned. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. There, on a pedestal in the center of the room, sat an ancient chest. Jack approached it cautiously, his hands shaking. This was it. He had found the vault. He opened the chest slowly, and inside, there were piles of gold coins, precious artifacts, and ancient documents. But what caught Jack's attention was a small weathered book at the bottom of the chest. It was the same book that Emily had mentioned in her journal, the one that had driven her to uncover the truth. As Jack flipped through its pages, the words jumped out at him. This book holds the secrets to Ashford's wealth. It was never meant to be discovered, but now that it has, there is no turning back. Jack closed the book, his mind spinning. He understood now. Robert had been desperate to keep the secret of Ashford's wealth hidden, and Emily had uncovered it all. But she had paid the ultimate price for that knowledge. Jack stood in the dimly lit vault, surrounded by the treasure that had sparked so much conflict and loss. As he gazed at the gold coins and artifacts, his thoughts lingered on Emily. She had been the key to everything. Her courage, her curiosity, her willingness to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Robert Harrison had tried to protect the secret, but in the end, it was Emily who had been the catalyst for everything to come to light. She had risked her life to expose what others had tried to bury. And now Jack understood the true weight of her discoveries. The treasure was not just a pile of gold. It was the story of Ashford itself, a legacy that had been hidden for centuries. As Jack left the vault and made his way back to the town hall, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily had known what would happen to her. She had written in her journal that she feared for her life, that she had never stopped searching for the truth. Her legacy was not just the treasure she uncovered, but the courage she showed in the face of danger. Back in his office, Jack made the decision to tell the world what he had found. The truth had to come out. He couldn't let Emily's death be in vain. The vault's contents would be preserved, but the knowledge of what Ashford's wealth had truly meant for the town, and the lengths to which some people would go to protect it, had to be shared. With a deep breath, Jack picked up the phone and called the local news station. He was ready to expose the truth, no matter the consequences. As he sat back in his chair, the weight of the past few weeks finally settling in, Jack realized something. Emily had solved the mystery, but it was Jack's job to make sure her story was told. Ashford's history, its hidden wealth, and the legacy of the Fisher family would no longer be a secret. And with that, the town of Ashford would never be the same.